Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Alex, one of the lead PGM ambassadors.
I'm Lanre, the other lead PGM ambassador.
And today with us we have...
I'm Anna Clodfelter and I'm the Chief Exec here at the University of Portsmouth Students' Union.
This is our first video in a project we're calling Lasting Change, the whole point of which, the name sort of gives it away, is to enact lasting change for racial equity at the University of Portsmouth. Thank you very much.
So the first question we have is, what do you know about PGM student experience as it relates to your service and department?
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying not enough and not as much as I thought I would over the period of time that I've been kind of focusing on learning about this stuff. So over the last 3 years, we've worked together with PGM Ambassadors, which is a new programme introduced 3 years ago to the Students' Union. And in that time, I've learnt and understood about the impact of the reality and the impact of things like microaggressions on a day-to-day basis. Bias and assumption, meaning inequity, and assumptions that are made around race. The prevalence of those microaggressions and biases and assumptions on a day-to-day basis, the stories and the sharing from our PGM ambassadors and also other officers, my own officers, and other officers across the southern region about the impact on a day-to-day basis of those things, and that I hadn't previously understood or understood the reality of those things. So I've come to learn that. Also, the bigger things like the societal racism and the impact that has in higher education, in things like reading lists and some of the other ways that shows up in HE, and how embedded that racism is in society and therefore in HE and therefore here. One of the other things that we experienced, unfortunately, together was the defensiveness and the difficulty of getting into a room and having an open conversation, and the impact that had on our, as PGM ambassadors and other students, in having to share and reshare those lived experiences over and over to help diminish the fragility of your white counterparts that you're trying to help to understand, and how the responsibility of that is so heavily put on our PGM students and our ambassadors, and kind of witnessing that and observing that and seeing that being part of that was a big learning for me in establishing me as a stronger ally and the ability for me to use my power and my privilege to advocate and step in and kind of ease those spaces and not have that responsibility sit on the shoulders of our PGM students.
Yeah, absolutely. I know definitely in my experience, and Lanre's as well maybe, we've been doing this job this is our third year now, and sometimes we're having the same conversations for the third time. So 3 years later, exactly. But yeah, thank you very much for that. What participation or attainment differentials exist in your line of work, and why do you think they might exist?
Okay, I'm going to talk for specifically my role. So my role is at a strategic level, so I'm not speaking for the Students' Union around participation in the Students' Union here, just to be clear. So my level is around kind of policy and structure and process and those kinds of things, but also about the workforce. So I'm going to talk through that lens. And we were talking yesterday, we were in a session yesterday, delivered a brilliant session, thank you, on anti-racism to one of our development days. So we had the whole of the workforce in the room. And our workforce, the people in the room, apart from the two of you, our PGM ambassadors and one of our elected officers, everybody else in the room is white. And so there is that disparity, that difference in participation, if you like, that is so distinct in our workforce. Why do I think it's there? I think it's there because it's there. I think there is this kind of rolling sense that it is not a place for me. It is not somewhere that I belong. It's not somewhere that is relevant, or there is very much this visibility thing, I think, going on, and I know that has an impact. I know that from speaking to staff, PGM staff who've now successfully moved on to other places, that the relevancy and that's a barrier, and is a barrier to those that kind of look at us and see that perhaps it's not somewhere that is for me. Was that the end of the question? Yes, I think it was. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you referenced the training session I did yesterday, and you've hinted at it pretty heavily, but one of the points I had on the last slide was, as a suggestion, is representation in staff.
Right.
And I didn't actually need to show any stats or anything. I just said, look around.
Exactly.
It's powerful.
Yeah, it's stark and striking. Right? Yeah.
So, my next question is, what have you tried to address the barriers and issues related to PGM experience?
So again, looking through that lens of the workforce. So we have, when we first started this work, we have done things like working with a specific recruitment agency to help to diversify our workforce, particularly through the lens of race. We have done things to try and de-bias the process, so by taking names out and anonymising application forms and those kinds of things. But I guess those are the only sorts of things that we've done. So the kind of more the first layer and the more obvious and those kind of things. And it has had, as you could see in the room yesterday, no impact on the diversifying of our workforce through the lens of race. So I think there is more work to be done, and there's probably going to be a follow-up question about what are we going to do about that next. But yeah, I think there's a sense when we tried to do those things that we were expecting miracles. It's going to change because we've done these things differently. So therefore, but of course that's not the case, and it's a lifetime's work for an organisation to continually. Okay, we've tried that doesn't work. So what are we going to do next? How do we step it up? How do we layer it? How do we make this become what we want it to be? And it's difficult. And I think in some organisations, it's too hard. So people try and then turn away. But our role here, my role here, is to ensure that the Students' Union doesn't do that.
I've actually been writing my dissertation about bias, and I've been talking about hiring quite a lot, and like the idea of like taking names out and stuff, because there's a lot of discrimination people have around like their names. Like
right.
There was a study like having an English or white sounding name, they were getting maybe 60 to 70 more, like recalls for interviews and stuff that they didn't have when they were using their ethnic names or when names weren't involved. So it's definitely a great step in the right direction, but I think a lot of companies, like you said, will do that first step and then say, okay, I've done it. Like I've
right.
taken out the bias, I've taken out that stuff.
Right.
But it's about having those next steps. Once you've done that, look at what the result is. If the result is what you wanted, okay, that's a great first step. But what is going to come next? I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that there'll probably be a follow-up question on what are you going to do next, and here it comes.
Yeah.
So what current plans or ideas do you have to address the issues that you mentioned?
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of things here, and I think the first one is, it seems so obvious that why have we not done this before? We are a students' union attached to a university full of students who are going to graduate and want a job. Some of those students are PGM students with PGM backgrounds. So why are we not leaning in fully and early and having conversations and creating pathways for those students removing barriers and creating spaces, mentoring, shadowing, all those kinds of things. So almost a kind of the pre-work before we get to the candidate section. You know, we are currently seeing candidate pools of white candidates. So we need to do the work before then, and we have a university full of students to do that with. You know, we even have communities of students with some of our societies who have, you know, prevalence of PGM students within them. Why are we not overtly working with those students? And it's only through this reflection that I come to this conclusion, which is just nuts. But so that's one of the things that I'm going to look to do. And then the second thing is that it is about the layering through the organisation. So we don't just employ career staff, and that was career staff that was in the room yesterday when we were together. We also have 100, 150 student staff. We also have however many, 1,000, 2,000 volunteers and student leaders as course reps across the organisation. So what are we doing to use that as a kind of pathway and ensure that the recruitment there is just as much focused on race equity and kind of creating specific pathways and spaces to make that happen, and therefore upping the knowledge and understanding of all of the staff across all of the organisation to make that happen in the broader sense, as well as just the work that I would do for career staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially using the student base that we have here when they're graduating, I think it's a really good idea. The last time I checked, we have over 20% BAME or PGM students studying at the University of Portsmouth. Outside of London, that's really rare. I grew up in Southampton, which probably shouldn't say it in Portsmouth, but that's fine. And yeah, it's not that diverse. And so the fact that we have such a diverse student population, A, highlights how representative of them we're not.
Yes.
But B, is such a fantastic opportunity
right.
To get them involved and to hopefully enrich them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So the name of this initiative is Lasting Change. So
Yes.
I want to ask you, what are your lasting change commitments?
Okay, I've got a few, but I'm going to pick some. I've got about 10 on my list, but I'm just going to share a couple of them. I think the conversation that we had yesterday and the conversations that we're having today has made me realise that the diversity of our workforce is critical and is something that we really need to address. So I think having something tangible that I can come back and say in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months time, these are the changes that we put in place. Much more radical, proactive, kind of the ruffling the feathers version of things around hiring, and when we hire, creating a space where our PGM and BAME staff can be their whole selves at work. So they want to stay and they want to represent, and it's a place where it's a choice, a workforce of choice. So that's one of them. The other side of the work that I do is the strategic development and the strategies and the development of our strategic actions and annual priorities and those kinds of things. We have not engaged, I have not engaged, our strategic task force has not engaged with our PGM ambassadors in the building of that work. We are now in delivery phase, so what those priorities look like, how they play out, how they can be nuanced to impact on positively on the experience, the student experience of our PGM students is my second commitment, that in 3 and 6 months' time, our annual priorities of the delivery of our strategy will be able to articulate really clearly how those strategic priorities are going to impact on the student experience of our PGM students. So those are the two that I'm picking, but hopefully I'll come back and talk about a whole bunch of other stuff that this process of self-reflection has really motivated me and given me, I suppose, permission and agency to use my position, my privilege, my my responsibility and my position of the appropriate power that I have to advocate for and make changes around race equity for students at the University of Portsmouth.
Absolutely.
For sharing those views. Hope to hear the rest soon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the process. Thanks.
That's all right.
See you in 6 months.
Yeah. We do actually have a couple of other questions based on your self-reflection form
Oh yeah, of course.
that we asked you to fill out. So the first question I have is about the embedding anti-racism plan that the union came up with. I'd just like you to tell me a little bit about what the process was in developing that plan and who was consulted in its creation.
So I'll back up a bit to where this plan came from. So you will know, because you were there, that we in 2021 we created led by our elected officers and they weren't PGM, you weren't PGM ambassadors then, but some of our PGM students, a zero tolerance to racism policy, and it was developed collaboratively with PGM students and officers. And embedded and implemented within a space of about 6 months max, I think. So it was an incredible piece of work. It led to opening doors for having some challenging discussions with the university that had led to changes there around the Race Equality Charter and the leadership around race equity within the organisation in the university that they were working on anyway, but I think that it escalated and amplified the student voices around that work. As a result of that work, I realised that I needed help and support in the broader EDI work that we were not doing well enough. So we employed an external consultant to come and talk to us and help us. As a result of that, we had an EDI strategy and action plan created. And we were very adamant that one of the elements, so there were various themes around all sorts of things, but one of those themes needed to be the embedment of this anti-racism policy, because I knew, and they played back to us, that the momentum for that needed to be embedded in a long-term kind of planning. So they consulted with us, and they put together this kind of 10 things that we needed to do to embed that over time. And I'll be honest, we haven't, since we've done that, we haven't done it as well as we need to. So one of the other commitments that's on my list is about assigning proper resource to ensuring that that section of the EDI action plan is elevated again and prioritised again. We used to have an anti-racism steering group, and then we moved that to an EDI steering group. We need an anti-racism steering group again. We need some assigned resource to this work to prioritise it again. So it's in 2 sections. There's the kind of section about the policy and the review and what that means and how that's showing up in the university and the work we do in faculties and with the PGM ambassadors and the officers supporting them and that kind of stuff. And then there's the stuff we were talking about a little while ago about the workforce and our PGM staff and creating spaces in a workplace that is works for them, to enable them to show up how they want to show up at work. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from and what we're doing with it now and what the plans are for it for the future.
Absolutely, thank you. That was really interesting to hear. I think what you mentioned about the anti-racism steering group having sort of evolved into the more general EDI steering group is a quite common problem that many institutions face. There are so many innate characteristics that we have that are either under assault or just weighed down with the baggage of millions, or maybe not millions, but centuries of oppression.
Yes.
And we're trying to undo all of them now in this day and age, which is, of course, a great thing. But it is a struggle trying to do all of them. I think something that's useful is how intersectional people are.
Yes.
You know, when you're dealing with anti-racism, there are gay black people, for example. There are black people with neurodiversity issues. So luckily, probably not the best word, but luckily when tackling one problem, it helps tackle several at the same time. So yeah, definitely don't want to extinguish the effort going into other groups, but it can be a positive that by doing them all simultaneously, it helps to put out other problems that have been existing for a long time.
I think you're right, and I think there was when we went from the anti-racism group into the EDI steering group, there was a fear around the perception of focusing on one protected characteristic, and there was a less understanding about the intersectionality, and actually having a distinct focus on race equity and anti-racism doesn't dilute the work that we're doing around other protected, as you've so articulately said, it enhances it. And I think there was a where we were in that journey of EDI work, it felt like a dilution, or if we're doing this over here, we can't do this over here, but actually it's possible to do both. And focusing on something also shines lights and action in other spaces too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So this is a final question.
Okay.
You scored yourself a 4 out of 10 of knowledgeability of race as a protected characteristic.
Yeah.
Why did you give yourself that score, and what would you like to learn to improve in the future?
Okay, so 3 years ago when I started to look at this work, I scored myself a 3 or a 4 because I had low knowledge, and I think what I've learned is that the knowledge, there is so much more to learn. So I think the 4 score is that I have knowledge of the things I need to have knowledge of, but I don't have that depth of knowledge. I'm not sure that score will go up if I do this work and focus on this work for a decade. I'm not sure that score would go much higher. For someone without lived experience, that it's difficult and it's challenging. I think my knowledge, where I want to increase that knowledge, is much more around the deeper understanding of the differences in race equity. I have been really lucky to work with PGM ambassadors over the last 3 years. We have fantastic officers, and we have had some black officers that I've worked with, so I have more of an understanding of the experience of black students and black officers than I do of other races and other kind of cultural backgrounds and those kinds of things. So that's, I would like to do some learning around that and working with students. And we had a real breadth of different races and backgrounds in our candidates for elections this year, which was fascinating, and I got to spend just a tiny little bit of time with those students and who were candidates, and really getting a glimpse of the distinct differences for students from distinct different backgrounds within that kind of homogenised race equity thing. So that detail, I think. And also, I think being more curious about not just how that shows up for me at work in the student space, but also understanding about heritage and art and culture and all those kinds of things, and being more curious and learning more deeply than just this bit of work. I think that's where my learning will go. That's what I feel at the moment. That's where I would intend it to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Anna. It's been a pleasure to have you. As Lamry said earlier, hopefully we'll see you again in 3, 6 or 12 months to check in. But it's been, as I said earlier,
it's been a fascinating and really insightful experience, and really enjoyed the experience in a kind of important way rather than a so kind of jolly way, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
been really beneficial and impactful. So thank you very much for asking.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks.